But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my process, how I approach art making, and a little bit about this piece. I brought a bunch of work with me. I can show you. None of them are prints. This is my first and only print, so I'm glad I made it here in the show. And it is called Milano. I made this with Haven Press in Brooklyn. And this is the first in a series of 8. I made these drawings during a stay in Milan, and it's really inspired by Milan's architecture, neoclassical architecture, and modern architecture. Milan has a rich history of product design, graphic design, and I wanted to incorporate all these impressions into this print. And the strong contrast in color come from my interest in Renaissance painting. I'm very interested in the application of chiaroscuro in my paintings and my drawings. And for non-painters, chiaroscuro is the application of light and dark contrast in paintings or etchings or prints. So for the print people, maybe you can see it a lot in Duros etchings and prints, or in painting, it's used a lot by Caravaggio, and it really adds drama to a painting as a light source, or it elevates the figures in the painting. So I use it a lot, but even though I'm not a printmaker, I try and make my work look like prints. So I really love a clean line. Everything is hard edge. I use acrylic paint. So these, I call them, well, they're paintings. I use a brush, and I am in love with acrylics because I love the flatness. I love what it does with the paper, and sometimes the problem of warping, somebody brought up, it happens here too, but it's really interesting material, and with different kinds of papers, you can really avoid that and figure out what works best. So this is from the Milano Series. Here I made this is an example of a series about New York. And my practice ranges from geometric to organic abstraction, so it really always goes from one end of the spectrum to the other. And everything I use as an inspiration or a source in my work is somehow rooted in the real world. I just put everything, I take everything apart, I rip things up, I make collages, and somehow these things end up as fragments of what they used to be. Everything is removed from its natural context, and sometimes I just use a color from a photo I took, or just everything I kind of collage together. These are a few collages. Collage is really important to me before I start working, and this is the fun part because my work in general is very controlled. There is no room for, like, once I go to the canvas or make a fiber piece, I know exactly what to do, but these things are the fun part because I can experiment, I can be free, and I can try out things. I love collecting old paper. I paint these things, I tear them apart, and that's really the beauty of collage, that all these different materials create a new reality and a new response, and they still exist as what they were before, but obviously there was some sort of a transition or metamorphosis, and it's a completely new artwork. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, I'm obsessed with lines. It's a huge part of what I use and what I think about. So I spent a lot of time, like 2 years ago, just thinking about what lines do, how we perceive lines in art, how I can use them in my work to direct the viewer's eye, create certain responses. And this work was interesting to me because we all can look at lines and we have this collective ability to extract meanings from them. We all know this curve may indicate like a human form, or it's very feminine. This upwards line creates some sort of the idea of something moving up, speed. So with this work, I was really interested in using my paper to the fullest. I have a color field, I have the negative space, and I have my line. So I wanted to, the line in the color field is activated, and once it leaves the color field, it just collapses and loses tension. And that kind of thinking helped me a lot with my fiber work. If you ever want to look it up, there's those ideas really like go from paper to painting to fiber work. So I just wanted to observe different responses and how we see these things. When is it just a picture? When do we see something more figurative? This is called The Companion. It's a drawing of a cat, as you can clearly see. Again, I thought it was interesting to maybe work with a figure that's alive. I have like the body, and then you have the paws and tails collapsing, so I wanted to incorporate that. Something with diagonal lines. I find them very interesting because when we see diagonals, they're always lines that are about to collapse. They need to be supported. They kind of float in space, and there's an upwards motion. If it's not anchored, how do we see it? So again, it's active in the color field. Once it leaves it, it collapses, and everything inside and outside is needed to support each other. So, and another example for these line drawings, I made, I went to France, to the French Atlantic coast, and when you go, I was walking along the coastal line, and I saw these tall, like the gigantic leaves of grass and flowers, and in those flowers were these little pink and grayish little dots. So I looked closer, and it was little snails that had attached themselves to the grass, and they were just kind of going back and forth in the wind and had kind of surrendered into that movement of going back and forth. So when I got home, I made these drawings. It's a set of 3, and obviously I showed them to people, and nobody knew that this was, the background story was these snails. But what I thought was interesting about it was that people still saw, made the association with something living, because they felt like, oh, maybe this is the human form, the body, the head. So, so it was interesting to me that that came up.
Sort of like that organic Mondrian.
Exactly. So, okay, so one of my main areas of interest, and this is where the chiaroscuro I was talking about earlier comes in, is my interest in light and dark contrast. So, and I'm really interested in the transformation of paint into light. So again, here's an acrylic piece, and I work a lot with gradient. So with these works, I really wanted to create 3-dimensional reality on a flat surface. And I was experimenting with, in these works, with the concave element, and then just adding the contrasts here, figuring out how colors relate to each other, how much darkness do I need to really make my image come to life or give you that impression that something is elevated. And it works better on the canvas. These are mostly studies to support that. And again, I make the gradients with acrylic, which is, it's easier to do these things with oil, but since oil gives you a lot of time to work and chisel and really make the gradient happen, with acrylic you really have maybe a minute, but I do feel that the gradient created with this material is, has a different quality to it, because there's this moment around here where the paint just kind of drizzles from one color into the next, and it really creates that beautiful effect. So when I first started making this work, it was really about spatial relationships. I was thinking in geometrical terms. I wanted to create space and walls and have maybe something bent. So it was really about like placing objects that are kind of flat on the canvas. And then later, I wanted to see what happens if I remove it. Does the gradient still hold up? It's not the same effect as with the concave element. and I started again to go back. And this is just a sketch for a painting I recently made, pencil drawing. Again, I always make these sketches so I know where my contrasts are, how things might turn out, how do I mix colors? Mixing colors is really important. Like I'd always try to bring blacks in and change it up a little bit. And so in the past year, since these were all very geometrical, I tried to push the work a little bit further and started to introduce curvilinear elements. This is a pencil drawing. And I realized, like, once I brought the curve in, and this is something I had really spent some time in with the line drawings I showed you before to really understand how does that affect us. And I felt like once I added the curve, the shape turned into form, and that form turned into volume. And I always think, like, once there is volume, there is emotion. And so this felt very familiar, almost like the human form, like a torso, or something was happening that was really, really familiar, and I just wanted to explore that a little more. So I tried to use it as an object or use it in form, and I really felt like once I started making these paintings, it felt like these forms were always in my space. Like I was not just painting the shapes, but I was creating a cylinder on the canvas. So then the next step, and these are paintings that I'm working on right now, and this is a sketch, so the paintings are bigger. Pencil drawing, again, here is a study for a painting I recently completed. So I felt like once I was creating these shapes and I was rearranging them, I felt like, oh wait, this is not just shapes lined up creating space. There's some sort of an interaction happening here. This feels incredibly human to me, even though, I mean, this is called Beechers. This is a woman and her dog. Excuse me. But it really changed a lot, so it became very figurative. This is where I am right now with my work. Thank you.